I'm from the State Archives, and I wanted to thank you for coming this evening to show your support for the State Archives. Our speaker is sponsored by the Cultural Trust Fund and part of a series of talks that was supposed to happen last October 2020, as part of Archive Month and to celebrate
I'm moving right along.
and to celebrate Wyoming's Airmail Centennial. Through funding of the Cultural Trust, we're able to offer this talk in person, and we are live streaming it on our Facebook page. Susie Taylor, reference archivist, is doing double duty as the videographer this evening. And so I have a couple of housekeeping items. I've got arrows all over my page, sorry. I have some housekeeping items. Restrooms are back towards the elevators and to the left. Please take a moment and silence your cell phones. And then for those of you who are on Facebook or watching us on Facebook, if you could please just drop us a hello in the comment section. That lets us know that you're out there and who you are. Please hold your questions to the end of the talk. Dave will be glad to take them. And for those of you on Facebook, if you want to drop your question in the comment section, Susie will relay that to Dave. Okay? So Wyoming historian Dave Marcum.
No.
He will be sharing his love of aviation in our state tonight with this topic of history of airmail service in Wyoming. He was born at Air Force Bragg, his words, not mine. Raised on Air Force bases in both the United States and Europe, he grew up around airplanes and has developed a passionate interest in them that only grew when he became an aircraft mechanic, working on B-52s, F-4s, F-16s, F-111s, KC-135s, SR-171s, and U-2s. There's a couple of rock bands in there.
The B-52s?
The seed was thus planted in him when, at an early age, and only grew after he became a member of the Wyoming Air National Guard. Having worked with flight engineer and historian Melvin Duncan in the Guard, Dave decided to follow up on Duncan's tales of concrete arrows found at sites throughout the state. He spent summers, still does, locating and cataloging the sites, and following up on field explorations with research at the Wyoming State Archives and a number of other local and institutions. Dave has since retired from careers of the United States Air Force and 30 years as a political science instructor at Laramie County Community College here in Cheyenne. His extensive research has led to 2 recent articles in the Annals of Wyoming, which is a publication of the Wyoming State Historical Society, and the happy task of sharing his findings with the local audiences. He dedicates his writings and his talks to Mel.
So I do have to. I'm not a historian. I'm a political scientist who happens to use my castles is the historian in the ground, but I am a political scientist. I use history to examine contemporary issues. It's not going to seem like that today. There's going to be a lot of history, but I am a political scientist, and just to kind of clarify that. So again, this was supposed to occur last year. This talk was supposed to occur last year. 2020 was actually the 100th anniversary of the airmail coming to Wyoming. The airmail actually started in 1918, but it got to Cheyenne, it got to Wyoming in 2020. So again, this was supposed to happen last year. But as they say, better late than never. Okay, so none of us has used this technology ever before, so if we kind of fumble around, bear with us. But this is kind of slick. I like this. Hi, I'm Dave Marcum. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I was actually born out on the base when the base had a hospital. The base doesn't have a hospital anymore, but yeah, I tell my students that was the ambulance that took my mom to have it delivered. I was in Air Force where I had a Cold War baby. My family and me at the Berlin Wall, aircraft mechanic, college professor. Now I'm an independent researcher. We'll talk a little bit more about these concrete arrows here in a minute. And again, if I do say something tonight that offend you, I do apologize before. Don't yell at the folks in the state archives. This is all me, it's not them. Okay, so if there's one thing I want you to take out of tonight's discussion, it's this, okay? That the airmail was not about carrying the mail. The airmail was this grand experiment that the United States government engaged in to try to jumpstart, if you will, a commercial aviation industry in this country. So if you go back and you think about when the airmail started, 1918, the end of World War I, when we demobilized after World War I, there was no aircraft industry in this country. Airplanes were toys as far as people were concerned. And there were some very, 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 very far-thinking individuals who saw the potential of the airplane, and they were looking for ways to kind of jumpstart the aviation industry in this country. And they seized upon the mail as the mechanism to do that because, of course, the Post Office Department had historically used transportation technology to enable them to get the mail out quicker and to deliver it faster. So, again, the mail was just a mechanism. There was this grand experiment that we're going to be talking about, like I say, to jumpstart the aviation industry in this country. The problem, as far as airplanes are concerned, is this. How do you get, particularly in 1918, how do you get from point A to point B? And that's still sometimes problematic today, even given our technology. But again, back in 1918, the problem is, given these very, very fragile things that we called airplanes, how do we get them from point A to point B? And as far as developing a commercial aviation industry, how do we do it safely? How do we do it reliably? And how do we do it dependably? Okay? Remember, the problem with an airplane that what goes up must come down. Okay? And so, how do you use this new technology to deliver the mail, and more importantly, how do we maybe expand the capability of aircraft to actually start carrying more cargo, passengers, like say safely, dependably, more reliably? Okay? Well, what you do is you create airways. An airway is exactly that. It is an aerial path, if you will, that connects point A to point B. Typically, it's a compass route. Okay, you tell a pilot that this is where you start to follow this compass heading, and it'll get you to point B. One of the things, though, that I want you to pay attention to, I assume, are you flying? You flying? Okay. So, whoops. Ooh, very sensitive. Okay. If you pay attention to my map here, this map is from 1935. All the little pictures, if you will, indicates infrastructure along the airway, and that's what's important here, is the development of the infrastructure that actually allow airplanes to fly safely, dependably, reliably from point A to point B. Okay? And none of this should surprise us. Okay, there was infrastructure related to the Pony Express. There was infrastructure related to the railroads. Okay? The analogy I like, okay, is that this infrastructure, the landing fields that we're going to be talking about here shortly, basically were analogous to the caravanserai that were developed along the Silk Road back in the Middle Ages. And so I actually kind of refer to the infrastructure that we're going to be talking about as caravanserai here. Okay, so introduction to the Transcontinental Airway. The first cross-country flight occurred in this country, 1911, I'm going to say. When did Orville do his thing? Okay, it took him 89 days, okay, to fly from the East Coast to the West Coast. Okay, not much of a cross-country flight. I mean, he was constantly crashing. He was having to rebuild his airplane, ended up in the hospital constantly. Probably for our story, the most important kind of first attempt at flying from one coast to the next was this huge Army maneuver that was conducted in 1919 called the Transcontinental Reliability and Endurance Test, where the Army basically flew a large number of airplanes from the East Coast to the West Coast, and they flew a smaller number of airplanes from the West Coast to the East Coast. And this was done basically to test the Army. Can you move resources from the East Coast to the West Coast, say if the Japanese attack the West Coast? Can you move resources to the East Coast, say if the Germans attack the East Coast? And so it was this great grand field test that was conducted in October 1919. Cheyenne, Rawlins, Rock Springs were major players in that test. There's some pictures of the airplanes that flew in and out of Cheyenne during that test. Okay, but as far as the experiment that we're talking about, that began about the same time as the trek, 1918, gets to Wyoming in 1920, and it followed what was called the Transcontinental Airway. Congress allowed the post office to develop a single airway, and that airway connected New York to San Francisco. Flew Chicago, Cleveland, Iowa City, Omaha, Cheyenne, Rawlins, Rock Springs, Salt Lake, and San Francisco. So Congress allowed the post office to set up a single airway that they were going to use kind of as their laboratory. This is how we're going to conduct our tests. This is where we're going to conduct our tests. The airplane that was probably the standard equipment of the post office was the de Havilland 4, the DH-4. Designed by the British, was mass-produced in this country. There were lots of them left over at the end of World War I. The post office took this 2-engine bomber, converted it into a single-seater, and it became the standard equipment of the post office department during the period we're talking about. For you kind of nerds out there, this particular DH-4 is configured for night flying. I'm sorry, for day flying. That really is beside the point. The only infrastructure that existed in this initial stage of the experiment along the Transcontinental Airway were the hangars that were built for the post office. The post office didn't build these hangars. Local communities built these hangars. Okay, the post office actually went out, and I'll be charitable here, kind of conned some of the local communities into building some of these things. They really didn't have a lot of money, so they went out and said, okay, Cheyenne, why don't you build us a hangar? And if you don't build us a hangar, we'll go down to Denver and talk to them. Okay, they go out to Salt Lake City, you know, hey, Salt Lake City, why don't you build us a hangar? Oh, by the way, if you don't build us a hangar, we'll go to Pocatello and talk to them. And so they were able to leverage community spirit, if you will, in these communities into actually building hangars. There were 3 depots, there were 3 terminals that were built here in Wyoming. Cheyenne, Rawlins, and Rock Springs. And that was it. That was pretty much the initial infrastructure of the Transcontinental Airway. Most of the time, if you could see where you were going, pilots were skilled enough that they could navigate from landmark to landmark to landmark to landmark. If the weather got really, really, really bad, they would fly under the clouds and they would basically navigate by the railroad. They would follow the Union Pacific Railroad. They would follow the Southern Pacific out in the western part of the country. Called the Iron Compass. Okay? And then there were some attempts at helping pilots. This is actually a Google Earth image that I took. I'm not sure you can see it really, really good. Oops. Yeah. Well, it's not. It's painting. Okay. If you see the letters, okay, it basically says tie sighting. And so what happened so you're flying along the railroad, okay. Sometimes pilots, because they're in bad weather or something like that, they lose track of where they are, and so they would paint locations into the landscape. They paint locations on the roofs of buildings. And as far as I know, this is the only aeroglyph from the period that still remains in one. You know, face it, a lot of this is paint. A lot of it's eroded away. A lot of it, you know, the sun is just kind of it's just gone away. And this one is disappearing, but you know, yeah, it says tie sighting right there. Initially, in this first part of the experiment, flying the mail was exclusively daytime. Okay, it was just too dangerous to fly at night. And so what they would do is they would jump in their airplane, they'd throw some mail into the airplane, and they'd go as far as they could. And then depending on where they ended up, okay, hopefully, you know, if you left Chicago, you'd end up in Cheyenne, but if the weather intervened or if night intervened, or if it's winter or something like that, whatever, okay, at night, they jump out of their airplane, they take the mail off the airplane, they throw it on the train, and the train would carry it the rest of the way, okay? So it was a very, very sloppy, very, very inefficient experiment. But still, remember, we're trying to prove, can we fly airplanes reliably, dependably, safely. Still kind of not impressing anybody here with our efforts. Which gets us to the second part of our experiment, the second stage. Paul Henderson, who at the time is the assistant second postmaster, decides that this is not a very efficient way to use the airplane. And so he decides we've got to go 24 hours. We've got to make this a nighttime operation also. And he decides that we're going to light the airway. Again, we're still limited to a single airway. Congress is still insisting only the single airway. But instead of flying just during the daytime, we're also going to start flying at night. And to do that, you've got to start erecting some infrastructure to help pilots navigate at night. Okay, because at nighttime you can't see out there. Remember, we're talking 1920. There's a lot of empty space in this country. There's a lot of places in this country where there's no light, there's no homes, there's no nothing to navigate by. So what the post office decides to do is to start building beacons along the route of the Transcontinental Airway. What this slide shows, and this is a nice picture, there were basically two types of rotating beacons that the post office built. You had, and this was the standard type of beacon, you had these tall 51-foot towers. You put the rotating beacon up here, but they were powered by acetylene gas. And so down here in the building at the base of the beacon, you'd have tanks of acetylene gas, and that acetylene gas then would provide the energy, if you will, that would then allow the beacon to flash its lights and illuminate the way for the pilots. But there are also beacons that were powered by by wind, okay? Which is actually pretty handy out here in Wyoming, because if you're from Wyoming, you'll know that the wind blows occasionally out here, maybe once or twice, yes. And so we did have some wind-powered beacons here in the state. I know there was one at Bosler, there was one at Lyman, there were probably one or two other locations in the state that had one. Okay? The very first two beacons built in Wyoming were built at Pine Bluffs and Burns. Okay, picture the beacon at Burns. Probably the most famous of the initial beacons, the post office beacons, was the beacon that was built up on Sherman Hill. Okay. By the way, if you're familiar, in fact, we'll talk about this here in a minute. There's actually the remnant of a concrete arrow up on Sherman Hill. That's not this location. Okay, when the Department of Commerce took over management of the airway, they actually moved the beacons around. But anyway, this became famous because it was used as the basis of one of the airmail, or one of the post office's first airmail stamps. Okay, this beacon is famous because it was advertised as the highest beacon on the planet. If you're not familiar, I-80, so this is right off of I-80, okay? The summit up on I-80 is actually the second highest point on the interstate highway system. So for those of us living here in Cheyenne, we drive between Cheyenne and Laramie, it doesn't seem that high. It actually is, okay? There is a mountain there, it just doesn't seem like it. And then another one, another example of a post office beacon that was built out of Dana. Dana is in the vicinity of Hannah. It's between Medicine Bow and Walcott Junction. If you're familiar with the old route, okay. I love this location. Very little remains of the post office system, but out at Dana, you've got the remnant of that's the footer of this beacon. They actually left two of the footers of that beacon intact, probably because the people that built the beacon actually wrote their names in the concrete. Little boys, they get around concrete, what do they got to do? They got to initial everything. And I got really, really excited when I found this. This is pretty cool. So you got EH, and then the date 1924. 1924 is when the post office decided to light the airway, so when the beacon was built. And I even got more excited when I found an article in the Rock River Times, we'll call it the Rock River Times, whatever their newspaper was, actually talked about these folks. EH is Edgar Hungerford. And so I've got a name to attach to this. And so you don't find much left of the post office system, but there you go. That's pretty cool. In addition to the rotating beacons, the post office also erected a string of blinker beacons. Okay, and this is where this gets really, 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 really interesting. So I want you to ponder this. I want you to kind of wrap your heads around this. These beacons were placed every 3 miles along the Transcontinental Airway. Okay, and I need to back up a little bit because the first lighted portion of the airway was that portion of the airway between Chicago and Cheyenne. Why? It's flat. Okay, it's the Great Plains. It's the flattest part of the Transcontinental Airway. Out east, you got the Appalachians. Once you get past Cheyenne, you've got the Rockies, you've got the Uintas, you've got the Sierra Nevadas, you've got that kind of mess. But between Chicago and Cheyenne, it's the Great Plains. It's very, very flat. So that was the first lighted portion of the airway. And so think about it. What is it? It's about 850 miles between Cheyenne and Chicago. Every 3 miles along that route, they had one of these blinkers in place. Okay? That's pretty impressive if you think about it. And then, when they decided to light the entire Transcontinental Airway, they installed these beacons basically from coast to coast. So what is it, about 2,500 miles from New York to San Francisco? Think about that. Every 3 miles, one of these blinker beacons. They had a problem with vandalism. Okay, there's so many of these beacons out there unattended. People would break into them. They would steal the acetylene gas. They'd steal the light bulbs and things like that. So it kept the mechanics who are responsible for maintaining the system busy. There's actually 2 of these. I know where 2 of these are. Actually, there's 3 of them left in Wyoming. And the folks at the Smithsonian think that these are crown jewels of American technology. And so I think it's pretty impressive that we've got a couple of these still remaining. Okay, so Airmail in Laramie County. Real quick overview of some of the activities that occurred. This is what the airport looked like at one stage in its career. Again, radio becomes very, very important in the story here. Cheyenne Airport. So I was an aircraft mechanic, and when I saw this picture, I just shuddered. I mean, this is a mess. I could not work in these conditions. I'm sorry. I mean, this is a god-awful mess. But still, okay, you got wings over here. You got spare parts all over the place. You got trash. Yeah, but that's how they maintain the airplanes. Of course, the DH-4 is very, very important. Nice lineup of airmail DH-4s here in town. I like this picture because if you zoom in on this one, U.S. Mail is just a stencil. They haven't painted it on the fuselage of that airplane yet. That's kind of cool. I like this picture too. The original hangar burned down, and this is a picture of Nellie Taylor Ross, the first female governor in the country, doing the groundbreaking ceremony for the new hangar, which is cool in itself. But what I like about this picture is what's going on in the background. Okay, the post office wasn't exactly, like I said, the post office wasn't exactly the most efficient operation when it came to this. So these are all airplanes that are configured for nighttime flying. And if you're paying attention, this one has its landing lights underneath the bottom wing. This one has its landing lights on the top of the bottom wing. This one is kind of a strange contraption. If you're paying attention, those are Belanca high lift struts. It was kind of a special modification because of the altitude, so they're trying to get some lift out of the airplane. But look where their landing lights are. They're up on top of the top wing. And then this one doesn't even have landing lights. So the post office, like I say, was, I don't want to say they were lackadaisical, but they certainly weren't as organized as we're going to see the Department of Commerce be here shortly. Of course, when you talk about the airmail, when you talk about the post office flying the mail, pilot stories are very, 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 very important. And so really, really quickly, I give you a couple of biographies here. Eddie Allen, if you're familiar with the name, flew mail out of Cheyenne. Eddie Allen is famous because at one time he was the premier test pilot in this country. He went to work for Boeing. He actually died in 1943 test flying a B-29. He flew the mail here in Cheyenne. Hank Boonstra flew the mail here in Cheyenne. He started on the Rock Springs to Salt Lake City route, but he ended up doing Rock Springs to Cheyenne. He's famous because he crashed this airplane on a mountain just on the other side of the Wyoming border in Utah, and he disappeared for 5 days. Everybody just was convinced he was dead. But I mean, these folks were tough. He fought his way through the snow, found a ranch house. basically was able to survive by making it to the ranch house, and then the rancher eventually got him into, I think, Colville, so he could call the post office and say, hey, I'm all right, blah, 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 blah. But what's fascinating about this story is that that airplane sat up there until the 60s, and they went up and recovered it, they rebuilt it, and it's now hanging in the lobby of the Post Office Museum out in Washington, D.C., which is kind of cool because it's a DH-4 that flew the airmail that is actually, with Wyoming connections, that's actually still around. Hal Tollefson, that very, very famous, depending on the record that you read, he either survived 30 forced landings, 35 forced landings, 40 forced landings. I mean, yeah, it's kind of funny. So they were, Collison, collision, okay, yeah. But a very, very skilled pilot. This is one of my favorite pictures of a DH-4 flight. A lot of controversy about where this was taken. One source does say, though, that this was taken here in Cheyenne with Collison flying the airplane, and I'm going with that. I don't care about any of these other interpretations. That works for me. He unfortunately died in 1935 in the crash of a Boeing United Airlines transport plane west of town. That's him, the inauguration of the night airmail endeavor. Jack Knight is probably the most famous of all of the airmail pilots. He's the one who did the ordeal flying the first nighttime airmail between Omaha and Chicago, just an absolute epic flight. He actually crashed his airplane a week before that up at Telegraph Canyon between Cheyenne and Laramie. And this is the picture after his epic flight. He still got the bandage on. He broke his nose when he crashed, okay? So that's the picture of his airplane up in Telegraph Canyon when he crashed there. I love this picture. Another day at the office. That's Collison talking tonight. And I love this because it reminds us how important storytelling is to the creation of intelligence, if you will. You can imagine they're sitting here. So Knight has flown in. He's dropped off the mail. Collison is about ready to take it on its next leg. And they're talking about, how's the weather, okay? Blah, blah, blah. Do you know they knocked down that barn that we've been using as a landmark? Oh, yeah, and by the way, Paul Perkins made a real good batch of coffee and apple pie. And so that's just a great picture. Another day at the office. Jimmy Murray, by the way, Murray Real Estate here in town, that's those Murrays, okay? Became a vice president of Boeing. He survived a crash up at Sand Lake, if you're familiar with the Snowies. Sand Lake is kind of between Elk Mountain and Medicine Bow Peak. He's 18 miles from Arlington in the middle of a snowstorm, and actually fought the blizzard, fought the snow, trucked the 18 miles to Arlington so that he could let them know where the airplane was and blah, 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 and help them out and things like that. When they went up to recover the mail, when they went up to recover the airplane, the story is that the folks, the rescuers, saw bear tracks shadowing his tracks. I think that's complete nonsense. I think the bears are sleeping at this time of year. But still, it's a nice story. He might have woke him up, yeah. Christopher Pickup. This guy was a rascal. Okay, he was a rascal. In fact, the airmail fired him. Okay, I mean, he was belligerent. He didn't like rules. Just leave me alone to do my job. But I love this picture because it's frontier days, and so he's got on his chaps, and he's got his 6-shooter on. The folks who flew out of Cheyenne really took the frontier days. They really loved Cheyenne. Some of them went out and competed at the rodeo. When Pickup was fired, he went out and became a race car driver. He competed at the Indianapolis 500. He then ended up in Hollywood flying for a film studio, and this is his airplane after it collided with another airplane while they were filming a Harry Houdini film, The Grim Game. If you've ever watched it, there's an actual airplane crash in that movie. It wasn't intentional, it was accidental, but it happened. They got it on film, so they wrote it into the script and put it in. Boeing Air Transport, United Airlines eventually hired him, and he died flying for Boeing when they were doing the long distance transports between Los Angeles and Australia during World War II. Frank Gager, another flyer. My favorite story about him was he got in bad weather out in the Nebraska Panhandle flying to Cheyenne, and it got so bad he's flying low. He actually landed his airplane and taxied across the ground. When he came to a fence, he'd hop over the fence and taxi along the ground. And yeah, I mean, these guys were something else. They really were. That's him. That he participated in the first nighttime inauguration of the nighttime meal. These guys flew a lot. They absolutely flew a lot. Jack Knight flew the equivalent of 52 times around the Earth. Okay, Jimmy Murray 50 times around the Earth. Chandler 49 times. Collison 49 times. I mean, and this is just their post office hours, because a lot of these folks then went to work for Boeing Air Transport and United Airlines when the post office got out of the flying business. So probably the most experienced group of pilots on the planet. And I mean, some of these hours, some of these miles that they're flying is just ungodly. Of course, there were tragedies. John Woodward was killed out here at Thai Siding in bad weather, flying between Laramie and Cheyenne. Dinty Moore, who's one of my favorites, died Christmas Eve, 1923, out in Egbert in bad weather. He was a very experienced pilot, so bad weather could bite you whether you were experienced or inexperienced. So we were talking earlier, Rob and I talk a lot about this. One of the things that kind of I enjoy with these kinds of projects is I call them squirrels. If you've ever seen the movie Up, remember the dog, squirrel, squirrel, squirrel. Well, I'll be reading newspaper articles and I'll say, squirrel, I gotta chase it. Well, Dinty Moore. Okay, you read that, what do you immediately assume? Stew, beef stew, absolutely. Well, I had to find out, okay, what's the relationship between his nickname and the beef stew? There is no relationship between his nickname and the beef stew. Dinty Moore was a character in a very popular cartoon strip in the 20s called Bringing Up Father. Okay, there was another pilot called Jigs Chandler. Well, Jigs Chandler was a character from Bringing Up Father. So you learn things when you do this. It's kind of fun. John Milazzo was born here in Cheyenne. Okay, he is Wyoming's only homegrown airmail pilot. Unfortunately, he was the last airmail pilot to die while the post office was carrying the mail. He died in 1927 in Ohio. The Milazzo family is still here in town. I worked with his grandnephew, Vito Milazzo, out in college, and honestly, God, I've never seen a Milazzo without a smile on their face. I mean, these people are just happy, 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 happy. So, yeah, over 40 people died while the post office carried the mail. 5 of them died here in Wyoming. Talk about Woodward. Walter Bunting died at Rock Springs in 1929. Paul Oakes, an acer, died here in town. Oakes was testing a DH-4 that had just been that just had heavy maintenance, and he pulled a maneuver that he didn't have the altitude for, and he burrowed in and killed both him and the mechanic. Dinty Moore, of course, Christmas Eve, and then Milazzo. Walter Stevens was one of the first pilots to bring airmail DH-4s to the state. He died 2 weeks after doing that in the crash of a JL-6. The airfield out at Rock Springs was named after him for a long time. Now we come to the third part of our experience. Okay, we're going to kind of get beyond the airmail, because this third part of the experience, of the experiment, results because Congress basically orders the post office to get out of the flying business. Okay? Post office, we no longer want you flying the mail. We want you to contract with commercial carriers to carry the mail. So the airmail aviation in this country, commercial aviation in this country, becomes much more decentralized. The post office sets the rates, the post office delivers the mail, Department of Commerce is responsible for the airway, but it's going to be commercial carriers now that actually carry the mail. And for most of us probably remember the days where the airmail subsidies were very, 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 very important to the operation of commercial airlines. Now you're starting to see more airways. okay? You're starting to see carriers starting to compete to fly the mail to carry the mail more from to other places rather than just New York to San Francisco. So you've got Los Angeles Airway, you've got Los Angeles to Salt Lake City, you've got Omaha down to Texas, you've got Chicago down to Miami. So you're seeing more and more and more airways. As far as Wyoming is concerned, this is the era of Boeing Air Transport and then later United Airlines. Okay, Boeing Air Transport was one of the original 4 airways that then got folded into United Airlines. I like this picture. If you're paying attention, what's that? That's a passenger. Yeah, we're starting to kill people. They carry people in DH-4s. Okay. In fact, I've got this great picture of Eddie Rickenbacker being carried as mail. Okay. I've got this even better picture of this young lady who is being carried as mail, and she actually has postage stamps on her forehead. Okay. If you wanted to fly on a DH-4 during the era when the post office carried the mail, you actually had to pay, and you paid the going postage rate. So they actually, yeah. But now people are starting to be convinced it is safe, it is dependable, it is reliable. The slam on the Boeing Model 40 was that if there was an accident, the pilot would get there last. It's a rather morbid joke, okay? Because if you have an accident, well, the passenger is going to die, okay? And of course, the pilot sitting back here is going to die after the passenger, so you, yeah. There actually, one of these crashed out here at Federal, killing the passenger. This is the era of the tri-motor. Okay, you're probably familiar with the Ford tri-motor, but there were other tri-motors. Boeing had a tri-motor. Beautiful airplanes. I mean, these are gorgeous airplanes. I'm going to tell you a story about, keep this, remember this, Model 80. I'm going to tell you a story about a Model 80 here in a minute. And then, of course, the experiment is succeeding. Okay, we're starting to see the emergence of modern air transportation. This is the Boeing Model 247. Generally considered the first modern air transport on the planet. Okay, all metal, low wing, retractable undercarriage, can carry, depending on what model you're talking about, 12 to 14 passengers. And if you're familiar with the airplanes, you look at that airplane and you should be able to see B-17 in it. I mean, there absolutely is B-17 written all over this. And that's what's important to realize is, remember, the development of a commercial aviation industry just isn't about developing passenger airplanes. It's also about supplying state-of-the-art aircraft to the Air Service and to the Navy. Okay? And then, of course, this airplane, as advanced as it was quickly superseded by probably the second most important airplane in the history of aviation, the DC-3. The first airplane that could actually carry passengers and make money. Absolutely phenomenal advance in air transportation. Okay, so what does this mean, though, as far as the airway is concerned? Okay, a couple of things going on. More infrastructure, much more infrastructure. I mean, it's safety, 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 safety. And so we're going to talk about terminals later, but we're going to talk about the intermediate airfields. Notice, when the post office was flying the mail, they were called emergency airfields. But you don't want to tell a public that's a little skeptical of flying that they might have to land at an emergency airfield. We don't have emergencies, okay? So we're going to call them intermediate airfields instead. Beacons, arrows, and then low-frequency radio ranges. Okay. The intermediate airfields that the Department of Commerce created across the Transcontinental Airway, other parts of the country, every 35 miles. Okay. We have a really, really, really good example here in the state of Wyoming out at Medicine Bow. In fact, the old intermediate airfield out at Medicine Bow is probably the best example of an intermediate airfield left existing in this country. Okay, the airfields had caretakers. If an airplane lands, you got to have people there to help. Okay, to help the passengers, help service the airplane, blah 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 blah. They would provide weather. They would provide communications. Of course, beacons. Here's the generator building for the beacon. And we're okay. The beacon and the generator building still exist out at Medicine Bow. Not much else, but still, this is pretty significant. Some of the lights that they use to outline the runways are still there. For those of you who fly, we still use this mechanism. Back in the days before you had active air traffic control, they developed this little tool. It's called a directional circle. This is what tells pilots, this is what directs pilots how they should approach the airfield. The circle out at Medicine Bow still exists. Still see it? Okay. So remember I told you I was going to tell you a story? Okay, there are people living at these airfields. Okay, they're caretakers, they're there to maintain the airfield, they're there to maintain the equipment, they're there to help an airplane if it should land. This is Ma and Pa Perkins. Okay, Ma and Pa Perkins, out of Cherokee. Cherokee was the intermediate airfield out of Creston Junction, if you know where that is, between Rawlins and Rock Springs. Okay. Ma Perkins had a reputation, best coffee, best pancakes in the region. Honest to God, I've got anecdote. I've got Collison talking about the coffee and pancakes at Ma Perkins. It was so good that Will Rogers had to land at Cherokee. Will Rogers was a regular user of the Transcon. He had to land at Cherokee twice, and he actually was so impressed with Ma Perkins that he wrote one of his editorials, or one of his pieces about Ma Perkins out at Cherokee. A lot of these airfields were located very, very close to the UP, but also very, very close to the Lincoln Highway. And so they also operated a gas station on the Lincoln Highway, so they were doing double duty. The story I want to tell you is, remember that tri-motor we were talking about, the Model 80? In 1931, one of them had to make an emergency landing at Cherokee in bad weather. They were stuck at Cherokee for 10 days. Okay? They ran out of food, they ran out of water, and eventually a rescue mission from Rawlins had to be driven out to Cherokee to actually rescue. So don't think that flying nowadays is really bad. It's really bad, but it doesn't even compare to what these folks had to deal with back then. The other thing that I find interesting, though, is, again, notice what we're talking about, the role of women in the operation of the airway. We're going to tell a story here. Okay. Then you have the beacons, every 10 miles, the rotating beacons. With the exception of Medicine Bow, as far as I know, there's none left in Wyoming from the Transcon days. There's a really, really nice example west of Albuquerque on I-40 if you ever get out in that neck of the woods. Okay, and I guess I should point out, notice the nomenclature, notice what's going on here. All of the buildings were marked with the airway that they were on, okay? So this is Los Angeles to Albuquerque, and they were given a number, okay? You're going to see that here in Wyoming, all of our stuff was marked SLO for Salt Lake to Omaha. I think that's kind of unfortunate. Slow. Okay, here they are. They're trying to prove to the world that we could do this, and we're calling it slow. Okay. And then where things got a little dicey, they also had these intermediate blinker beacons, if you will. A couple of these in Wyoming, not much left. This is a site out in Sweetwater County. And of course, if you talk to anybody about the airway, and this is what your dad was looking at when he got me excited about this, are the arrows, the concrete arrows. Now remember, they're a little late in the story here. The post office did not erect these arrows. Okay, this is Department of Commerce, and we're talking probably early 30s before the arrows start making an appearance. The arrows that we're familiar with out here are all concrete. There were metal arrows in other parts of the country. I'm not sure there were ever any metal arrows in Wyoming. If anybody knows of some, I'd love to hear that. Okay. By my count, there are bits and pieces of 17 arrows left in Wyoming. The heavy-duty highlighting are arrows that are relatively intact. They're in good shape. The other ones are in bits and pieces. I take particular pride in Gager because I rediscovered that in a garbage pit. Nobody knew it was there, and so I'm digging around and going, yeah, cool, yeah, great, okay. And then you have low-frequency radio ranges, okay. The radio ranges transmitted a beam that pilots would fly. Remember what we're talking about. When we talk about beacons, when we talk about concrete arrows, you're talking about basically visual navigation aids, which don't work if you can't see them, which happens a lot when you're flying in a blizzard or in fog or something like that. And so they very, very early on worked very, very hard to develop radio navigation aids. And that's what the low frequency radio range was all about. Transmitting a beacon that pilots could fly along so that they didn't actually have to see the arrows or the beacons and things like that. Of course, it requires a bit of infrastructure. Nice example out in Albany County, just northwest of Laramie. This is the building where the radio equipment was kept. And the base of the towers that were used. This is I-80 right here. You can actually see it from I-80 as you're driving along. And this needs to be preserved. I mean, this should be on the national, yeah. Of course, it's Wyoming. Very, very extensive system of low frequency radio ranges were developed around the country. Okay, so what did the Transcon look like here in Laramie County? Of course, we had Cheyenne Airport. We had 2 intermediate airfields, one at Pine Bluffs, one at Burns. The one at Burns kind of disappeared quickly. We really didn't need Burns. Then you had 4 beacons, the rotating beacons, one at Mcentire Ranch, one at Silver Crown, one at Archer, one at Hillsdale. We had a low frequency radio range here in town, and then radio and weather forecasting facilities. Okay? And again, this map just shows the location. The stars are the beacons. Now, the reason I showed this is notice that Silver Crown is 40. This drove me nuts until I figured out what was going on here. Here, Silver Crown is 39. They renumbered the darn things. And so it was just driving me nuts until I figured out that, yeah, they actually did renumber them. So you'll come across different numbers for the beacons. You can see on the map the beam that they have to fly along. And then here's the airway over Cheyenne. Okay, we're going to start with Sherman. Sherman's not technically in Laramie County, but you got to start with Sherman just because it's up. So this is when they moved. Remember the one, this postage stamp beacon that we were talking about? They actually moved it 9 miles south to this location. And if you're not familiar with them, this is what I'm talking about when you talk about the concrete arrows. Okay. Here in Wyoming, the arrows were always pointing east. Okay. This site fascinates me because adjacent to this arrow is this rock structure, if you will. And it took me a while, but I think I figured out what's going on here. Okay. Remember we were talking about how women played a very, 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 very active role in the operation of the airway. So you had caretakers living in. There's actually over here. There's the foundation of the small house that they lived in. I've actually found a nice newspaper article that describes life up here. And what was going on was that for some reason the male side of the partnership was always driving back and forth to Laramie. And I'm beginning to think maybe he had a second job at Laramie because he was always driving to Laramie and leaving her up on that mountain to run things. And what one of her jobs was to measure the height of the clouds, because as we all know up on the Sherman, those clouds can really settle on that mountain up there. And so what she would do is she would turn on a searchlight, aim that searchlight straight up into the sky, and then she would use a sextant to actually then measure how high the cloud was. I'm thinking that this is the base for the searchlight. Okay, because if you're thinking about to use that sextant, requires so we're thinking maybe the searchlight is at that wall right there, and she's got to be just a little bit away from that light to get a good measurement. Not thinking that that's where they installed their searchlight, so they could, because it's right at the edge of the mountain. So she could tell them, that cloud is 20 feet high, that cloud is 30 feet high, and then she would call it readings into Cheyenne and Laramie, so the pilots would understand how low the clouds were. And there's some interesting stuff going on up here at these sites. And this is the next one, the arrow at Mcentire Ranch. So again, you can see the foundation right here of the generator building. You got the arrow shaft. The beacon was right here. And then, of course, the arrowhead. The generator was called the feather. Those were the feathers of the arrow. Okay? A lot of them were outlined so the pilots could see them quicker. I love this picture. This is okay. So think about this. If you guys are familiar with Laramie County, if you understand what I'm talking about, They're installing these beacons out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they literally are installing these beacons out there. My wife and I were just down in Southern California. We stopped at 2 beacon sites in the Mojave Desert. I mean, out in the middle of nowhere. Bless my wife's heart. I mean, yeah. So, but think about it. They've got to get the concrete here. They've got to get the wood for the formers because these have to be built to very specific dimensions. Okay, you got to get the beacon tower here. You got to get the light here. Okay, if you're lucky, you can drive that material to the site. If you can't, you're going to truck it in using either horse or mule power. And if you're really, really unlucky, you're going to have to use manpower. It's going to have to be packed in just using good old human power. Okay. I love this because look what's going on. Don't even have to touch it. Go on, stop. What are you?
Go the other way.
Yeah. See what's going on there? It's hooves, hoof prints, okay? They let their mule autograph their arrow. I love it. And then the arrow with silver crown. This is the one they think Collison missed when he crashed his airplane just west of town. And then you've got 2 that are kind of falling apart out at Archer and Hillsdale. Nothing much in Burns. It's a nice looking cornfield, but not much left there. And really couldn't tell you much about Pine Bluffs because I haven't been able to identify precisely where it was. And nobody in Pine Bluffs remembers anything about the airfield. So I've still got some stuff that I need to find. Okay, and then as far as Cheyenne is concerned, this is what the Boeing, the United Airlines facility looked like initially. These 2 buildings still exist. I love this picture. You probably can't see what, but there's a lot going on in this picture. First of all, you've got the airfield here. You've got the Boeing facility. See the landing circle right there. Lions Park. Not a lot of trees there, okay? And if you're, Frontier Days is going on, okay, because the stands are full. You got traffic all out here. And then they say probably D.A. Russell at the time. I don't think it's been renamed quite yet. And if you look right there, there's the LF4 facility. So I like that picture. On a day like that, in this kind of clear weather, a pilot probably could see the beacon at Silver Crown, could probably see the beacon at Mcentire Ranch, could probably see the beacon up at Sherman Hill. And then this is looking the other direction. Again, the fort, the Army fort. Here is actually the weather forecasting facility. Here's the LFR, Frontier Days Park, and then the airfield. Wasn't a lot in Cheyenne back then. I like this picture. This is a Bremer picture. Francis Bremer was a famous photographer here in town. He was taking a picture of the old Warren Stadium. The Army used to play football. In fact, what was it, Susie? The base team beat the Chicago Bears one year?
No, it was the Tigers.
Was it Chicago? Yeah, they actually beat a professional football team.
No, it wasn't Detroit Tigers. It was the only NFL game ever played in Wyoming, and Fort D.A. Russell's Broncos
Won the game, yes. So, yeah, and they played football there probably until after World War II. But what I like about this picture is, again, here's the low-frequency radio, the low-frequency radio range, and here's the weather broadcasting facility. Again, Frontier Days and the airport right behind you there. Those are the buildings. You probably can't see it really, really good, but this sign is kind of interesting because it says, again, notice Airway, SLO, Cheyenne. It says Department of Commerce, Airways Division, Lighthouse Bureau. Although the Department of Commerce, although the Airways Division was responsible for the beacons, it was actually the Lighthouse Bureau that managed the things. The folks who ran Hatteras and all the lighthouses on the East Coast actually were the ones who were maintaining what they call the lighthouses here in Wyoming. Shows you how busy the Boeing facility was, the United Airlines facility was here in town. If you count, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 247s and 1, 2, 3 DC-3s. Our maintenance facility was getting national attention because of what they were doing here. It was that big. It got a lot of attention. And notice that the buildings here have been joined now. From the tri-motors. DC-3 in the hangar being maintained. Now, just to clarify any misconceptions, if you know anything about Cheyenne, that's the United Airlines facility. This is the modification center. They weren't the same place. Two entirely different places. If you're not familiar with Cheyenne, we had a large modification center here in town. Boeing would build B-17s, and then they would send them to Cheyenne, and Cheyenne would actually modify them for service in Europe and then ship them off to the war. What I like about this picture, if you know your airplanes, if you're paying attention, the modification center here in town is associated with the B-17. Well, there's a B-24 right there. And there's a couple more out here. I cropped the picture. So there was a lot going on at the modification center, but two different facilities. This building still exists, so you can't tell. It's been remodeled extensively over the years. The fountain, if you're not familiar with town, is a beautiful piece of architecture. This is the old Boeing Air Transport, United Airlines terminal / administration building. It still exists. Again, this hangar has been extensively remodeled, but there's fabric from the Boeing hangar there. That's what's left of the low frequency radio range. It's out of the base, so most of you probably could go out. I mean, it's a concrete pad. You don't want to go out and see it anyway. Only people like me are interested in that kind of stuff. But this is kind of cool. We're convinced that that's actually one of the antenna from the low frequency radio range. It's at a construction facility out on the southeast side of town. And this is what the airways looks like today. Okay? If you're driving around, you see these strange, we call them ice cream cones, upside down ice cream cones. If you're driving around, these are what the beacons look like today. And oh, by the way, they're disappearing because we're going to a satellite-based navigation system in this country. Okay, so this is not the only project. Now, this is where my fishing. I'm going to bore you just a little bit longer. I want a fishing trip here. My work on the airway is just one project I'm working on. I'm also doing a history of the Cold War in Wyoming. The Ground Observer Corps, if you're familiar with their work. I know there was a unit here in Cheyenne. The folks that before the invention of radar would go out in their backyards and look for Soviet bombers coming over the horizon. There was a very active operation here in Wyoming along those lines. We had a top secret seismic surveillance system here in the state trying to detect detonations of Soviet bombs. Of course, the Atlas ICBM, the Sundance early warning radar. First time a portable nuclear reactor has actually been used in the field. It's still up there chugging along. I mean, the Air Force left in '68, but that reactor is still up there. It's buried, but they're just going to let it burn out. Radar bomb scoring detachment at Powell. See if you guys can tell me that. So this is the up in Dayton, which is north of Sheridan. This building was built in 1911 as their fire tower. While the Ground Observer Corps used it, people would climb up there. So, yeah, okay, out of Grass Valley, just north of the PTC. This flew. Okay, so I'm out at Green River doing research. I'm in their museum, and folks there said, "Let's come over here and look at this. Tell us what this is." You guys see what that says? It looks like a BLM benchmark, doesn't it? It looks like a geological survey. But you see what it says? United States Air Force Gravity Station. Can anybody tell me what a gravity station is? I didn't know. Okay. But once they, remember squirrels? Remember I talked about squirrels? I got to find out what a gravity station is. I grew up thinking gravity was a constant. I was taught gravity is a constant. It's not. Gravity is not a constant. Remember our original problem. How do you get an airplane to fly reliably, dependably, safely from point A to point B? How do you get an ICBM launched from Cheyenne, Wyoming to actually hit Moscow? Well, if you've got differences in gravity, that's going to factor into, And so gravity is not a constant. There actually are differences in gravity. So there actually was a unit out on the base, and I would have loved to have been in this unit because they traveled the world measuring gravity. I mean, they were all over. So that they could then program that information into the inertial navigation system of the ICBMs. So I'm kind of studying them, and also I'm kind of doing bomb shelter craze, if you will. So if anything, you know anything about this, I would love to talk to you. Of course, my work is inspired by Mel Duncan, okay? And brought to you by the State Archives and me. So, questions, comments?
So when you comment on a beacon, it's strictly a light source, correct?
Well, okay, so beacon can refer to any number of different things, but for purposes of what we've done here, when you're talking about a beacon, you're talking about a light source. Because remember, that the ice cream cone that I showed you, they refer to them as beacons also, so that's not a light source, but for purposes of my study, what I'm looking at are the lighted beacons. And again, there were two types. You had, you know, the ones that were attached to the tall tower, and they would rotate. In fact, if you travel around the country, they still use those. Okay, the rotating beacon. Here's the airfield. Okay, here's where we are. And then you had the ones that were stationary that just blink, 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 blink. So they came in a couple of different varieties, but the ones I'm looking at are primarily light sources. Dan?
So the airmail pilots, the early airmail pilots were flying in open cockpits.
Right.
How high were they flying?
Depending on the
What were
weather.
some of the challenges?
Oh my God, Dan. Well, weather today is still a challenge for flying. And it certainly was probably the major, because you know, basically we're talking 1920. People really did not understand weather. So there's a story, Jack Knight, okay, the gentleman we were talking about. There's a story about him jumping in his DH-4, takes off from Cheyenne, and he's headed for Rock Springs. And I guess cloud cover, so he had to fly above the clouds, which wasn't recommended. But Jack Knight was experienced enough that he, well, and let me stop for a second. It wasn't recommended because if you fly above the clouds and wind blows you off course, you can't see your landmarks, so you don't know where you are. So the standard practice back then was to actually fly under the clouds so that you could track Union Pacific Railroad, or you could, you know, there's the barn that I need, and there's the big butte that I need to follow, and things like that. That's why Gager, when he got caught in weather, he basically just landed his airplane and taxied it. And that's a true story. I found several newspaper accounts that talk about that. But anyway, Jack Knight's flying above the clouds because he's pretty darn good. He's chugging along, and most of the time, if you couldn't see your landmarks, they would time themselves. Because they were good enough to know that if I'm flying from Cheyenne to Rawlins, it's going to take me 3 hours. In fact, there was one pilot out east, he would measure his flying time in terms of a cigar. Okay? He'd light the cigar upon takeoff, and by the time the cigar was, he should be where he needed to be. Okay, well, that's all fine and dandy unless you get weather. So Jack Knight takes off. Fly. 3 hours I should be over Rawlins. Okay? I'm not over Rawlins. I'm not getting anywhere. He takes off and he lands at the nearest town. Well, the nearest town's Cheyenne. Okay? He had taken off and he basically had been flying into a wind that was strong enough that he was completely stationary. He was making absolutely no problem. Have you ever seen a bird flying in the wind? And the bird's just, that bird's going nowhere. Well, that was Jack Knight. Okay? We're pretty sure that a lot of the wind that the pilots dealt with back then was the jet stream. It's just we didn't know the jet stream existed. We had no idea what the jet stream was. Okay? And so the weather was, and then, you know, you're talking airplanes that are pretty frail. So what was it? The famous story, Collison. Okay? He's out over the Red Desert. And his propeller comes apart. I mean, he's flying along, and all of a sudden he's starting to get a vibration in his engine, and it's starting to get worse. And his propeller's coming apart. And all of a sudden he's a glider because his propeller has basically disintegrated. And and so you had mechanical issues. And I mean, these guys were if you survived, say, the first year, you got pretty good. These guys were excellent flyers. Yes, sir.
The acetylene powered beacons.
Yeah.
Is the acetylene used to produce electricity, or is it the acetylene flame producing light?
I can't get anybody to tell me how these things work. Okay? But I'm.
Would there be a patent record on it?
Well, I think the gas was burned, and that somehow produced the energy then that generated the electricity that. But I can't get anybody to explain to me exactly how these things work. It's absolutely clear that they use acetylene. In fact, there's a site out. Are you from Wyoming?
Yeah.
You know where Fort Bridger is then? Okay. So there's an old acetylene blinker site there, and I know that that's the site, but it looks like there's bits and pieces of what you would think was a stove, and that leads me to believe that yes, they're actually burning the stuff to produce the energy to light the light. But I can't find it, and and I've gone through a lot of the journals of the day. And nobody will explain exactly how these things work. So I don't know if it was because it was proprietary information and it just didn't get distributed and it's just been lost in the ages. But that's one of the things, damn it, I'm going to find out how these things work. And yeah, just driving me nuts. Yeah, there's still a lot of stuff that we don't understand about what they were doing back then. Yeah.
I was wondering, well, two things. One, the tie siding,
Yeah.
the marker.
Uh-huh.
Can you get to that, or is that on?
It's on private property. That's been a challenge. I don't trespass. I refuse to trespass. I just won't do it. I own 10 acres, and I get really, really irritated when people get on my property. It's just common courtesy to ask first. And so I will try really, really, really hard to find the landowner and talk to them. That's been one of the gratifying things. I grew up with kind of an attitude about ranchers. I didn't like ranchers. Just didn't like them. Some of my relations are ranchers, and they did. But I've changed my attitude because the private landowners, who by the way are protecting this stuff, probably more so than the state of Wyoming, have been incredibly gracious, giving me access and things like that. I've been granted access to tie siding, I just haven't made it out to it. It's not. It wouldn't be hard to get to, but I would encourage you to contact the landowner before you go out there.
And then what about the Sherman one?
That's on National Forest.
So you can, how do you get to that?
Oh, that's it. Well, what kind of car you got?
I have to rent, because I don't live.
Well, if it's a rental, don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah, so I'm just making sure it's right.
You can tear up rentals. It's fine. Okay, so well, I was up there the other day, and it's getting kind of.
We were there last year.
Last year was that bad.
We were in a truck though.
Yeah. So
It's bumpy.
It is bumpy. Okay, so do Happy Jack. Happy Jack is.
So you do Happy Jack and then.
Well, you can do I-80, but who wants to do I-80? Do
You
Happy
come
Jack.
up by the summit.
Yeah, so what you're going to do is, you're familiar with Happy Jack, right? Okay, so you're on Happy Jack, you're almost to the summit. You know that nasty turn that what is it? Tie City. The parking, I have to remember, it's Tie City and Tie Siding. So Tie City, you know where the parking area is? There's a road off to the right just opposite of Tie City.
It's a little picnic area now, the Tie City picnic area.
Well, there's all kinds,
I just know they have like a Forest Service.
Well, you can make your own picnic area there. Or
I know,
something.
but I just remember seeing like the National Forest things.
Yeah. So you're going to go off to the right. And what is it? It's the second turnoff because that
Yeah, I was going to say it's one of those turnoffs. But you kinda
yeah,
look-
because that ridge is just lined with antenna.
there was a number on it though.
Well, but since so I think it's the second one.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, and you're going to go off to the right, and it's just right there. Yeah, and it's on National Forest land. So technically, Mcentire Ranch is on public land, but you have to cross private land to get to it. And the landowner likes to be asked before you do that. Silver Crown is on private property, so you have to ask it.
They were putting in a tall radio tower last summer.
Up at Sherman?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've always got something going on out there. because it's a high point, and so, yeah, there's all kinds of telecommunications. So it's fairly easy to get to.
And Archer's easy to find too.
Yeah, it is. Hillsdale's not too bad.
Yeah.
And they're restorable. I'd love to see the state start restoring some of this stuff.
I'll tell you about Archer afterwards.
Okay.
So where's Archer?
Well, you're east of town.
Okay, so my family
On West
homesteaded
End.
in Carpenter.
Okay,
It's not
so
Okay.
so Archer. So what's the truck stop?
Wested. Sap
Well-
Brothers?
You remember Sap Brothers?
Yeah.
That's Archer.
Yeah.
And it's kind of out there.
You'd come like a
30 in
mile
Wested.
back from where you would get off the interstate in Archer to the street called Wested, go down Wested.
So that's the one that's almost in somebody's front yard.
It's, I'll fill you in now.
Yeah.
Well-
That whole wheat
Plot?
field has been subdivided.
Oh, it has.
And we were out there, we lived very within, we can
Right
throw a
across
rock,
the street of that.
basically.
They're gonna tear it up.
No,
No,
no. Here's the good news. We were out walking our dogs in the area like we usually do, and there's a little Jeep SUV parked there with the construction company's name on it at that particular lot that this is on. And I say, I got to talk to this guy. As you know, I well talk to people out there, but that's how we met. And I said, hey, you're part of the development of this? I forget the company. And the guy says, yeah, and he gives me his card. He's the VP of the company. I said, do you know what's on this property? And he
Good for
said,
you.
yes, we do
He
know
does?
it.
Okay.
Yeah, he said, we know it, and we're actually going to kind of, to sell that lot, make it part of the sales pitch for it.
So they're going to make a subdivision?
It has
It's
been.
already-
Let's see, what I'd like to see them do is maybe make a little park there and
I
restore
said,
the Euro.
to me, that's the perfect project for an Eagle Scout.
Sure.
That wants to do his Eagle Scout project.
Yep.
Fence it off. And of course, I was ready to throw myself in front of a bulldozer.
Well, good for you. We need more of you.
But that's me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still private property.
It's still
Yeah.
private
But
property.
it's very
Hillsdale is also
accessible.
still private property, but it's right on a road, and some of these lots are owned by people who live out of state, and
Yeah.
it's really, really hard to find, and so there are times when I will kind of fudge a bit.
I'd like to see it restored.
Some of these are restorable, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Susie,
Okay.
do you have any questions from Facebook?
Well,
Nope, but I do know the Forest Service Road, it's 703B.
I said I knew there was a number on it.
They,
We were
no,
looking
I
for
just,
numbers.
off the top of my head,
I've been to the Mcentire Ranch area.
Yeah.
There is a pit 30 feet away from it.
yeah,
What is the pit?
it could have been anything. I'd have to go look at it.
There's some twisted metal around it, look at the remains of the tower, and there's nothing on this concrete anymore.
Yeah.
Then there's this, just over the hill, but it's within 30 feet, there's this conspicuous wood-lined pit.
They, one of the things that I have discovered as I have investigated these sites is when they decommissioned the beacons and they went in and did whatever they did, sometimes they were really, really neat about it, and sometimes they were really haphazard, because if you go out to the Mcentire Ranch, on the northeast side of that arrow, there's still pieces of concrete that I'm pretty sure were probably parts of the building.
Yeah.
So they just knocked it down and just shoved it off to the side. And so it would not surprise me if that pit probably isn't a garbage pit where they probably dumped all their stuff into. So, yeah, yeah. Anything else?
Cool.
Anything else?
Well, great, guys, this was great. Thank you for coming out.
Good info.
Once again, thanks for the Cultural Trust for
Yes.
sponsoring this
Yes.
program this evening. And then also, we have some flyers about our programs that are coming up in July. We have 3 different
Some good
programs
stuff.
coming in July. Continuing with our Archives Month 2020 delay. So there's flyers on the table. You're welcome to take one, and we hope we see some of you then. And then all everybody's welcome. They're going to be on Facebook also.